Hi there and welcome to my first ever sit-down book video. If you're new here, my name is Sara and I live here in Copenhagen, Denmark, where I make cozy, bookish, seasonal vlogs. And if you're a regular subscriber and you're not into this kind of sit-down book content, that's totally fine. I promise my next video will be a vlog and I can't wait to share all the updates on my new apartment with you guys. So I'll just see you next week if you're not into this. But if you are into books or you just want some recommendations or maybe you're curious about getting more into reading, I think you should make yourself a nice cup of tea and sit back and then let's talk about all the books I read in 2024. So 2024 was definitely the year where I truly fell in love with reading. I've always been a reader, but I've never quite loved it the way that I do now. For years I would read maybe a book a month and it would mostly be literary fiction and like whatever important book that was getting really good reviews at the time. And to be honest, I think I was kind of reading for show a little bit. I did read some amazing books, but some of them were quite hard for me to get through. But then at the end of 2023, I had watched some book videos on TikTok and I decided that I had to pick up The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood, and that was life-changing for me. I was completely hooked by that book and I finished it in less than 24 hours and I was immediately looking for my next fast-paced, fun romance, and that's how I got really back into reading. So when the new year came around, I decided that I wanted to read 20 books in 2024. And spoiler, I hit that goal in April, I think. And I ended up reading 43 books in 2024, which is a little bit less than a book a week. And I have loved every second of it because I just allowed myself to read whatever I thought was fun. I read a bunch of contemporary romance, a bunch of fantasy books, and of course also some literary fiction and more classic books. And I am very, very grateful for all those years where I kind of was reading for show because I read some really amazing books. And I pushed myself to finish some books that, even though they may not be page turners, they have stayed with me for years and years afterwards. And I do want to keep prioritizing reading literary fiction still, but definitely most of the books we're gonna talk about today are gonna be on the more lighter side. I think it's important to acknowledge that there are books that are objectively good books, and then there are books that are good because they're fun and entertaining and easy, and one should not be mistaken for the other. There is not going to be any Shakespeare in my pile of books today. Most of the books that we're going to talk about today would qualify to be kind of the junk food of literature, which there is no shame in. I love pizza as much as the next person, but I'm not going to sit there and say that it tastes like a Michelin meal. I will leave that up to the professionals. But if you want to get pointed in the direction of some really top-tier junk food literature, please keep watching. So let's get into it. The first book that I read in 2024 was Confessions of a 40-something fuck-up, and I rated this book 4 stars on Goodreads, which, looking back, I'm like, what? I definitely don't think that this would be a 4-star read for me now because I've read so many amazing books afterwards, but this book was definitely super fun and witty. It is about a 40-something old woman, Nell, I think her name was, who is going through life and comparing herself to all the other adults in her life and feeling like a fuck up because she's not at that point in life where she thinks she should be. She's single, she is struggling in her career. At some point in the book, she forms an unexpected friendship with an 80-year-old woman who teaches her a lot about life, and it's just a super fun, light-hearted, life-affirming book and a really good reminder that it's never too late to pick your path in life and that there is no set time frame where you need to have everything figured out. So I really enjoyed this. It also has a romance plot, but it's definitely more about her friendship with the older lady and all of her general friendships in her 40s. And this feels like a modern Bridget Jones. I think that's kind of, it's crazy to say. The writer is Alexandra Potter and she is super funny. So I would recommend this. There is a sequel now. I think it's also a TV show, but I have not watched that. I've not read the second book. I don't know if I will, but I definitely enjoyed this one. I think now I would probably rate it 3 stars instead of 4. Moving on to the most important book of the year. It's the first fantasy book that I have read since I finished Twilight as a teenager, and it was life-changing for me. And I know that this book is so hyped and everyone is talking about it, and tomorrow the 3rd book in the series actually comes out and I'm so excited. I read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This is a fantasy book. It has dragons. She goes to this like war academy where her and a bunch of other young kids are taught to basically kill each other to become a part of an army and a war. Basically, they have to form this bond with a dragon. Like, they have to be chosen by a dragon to continue the school and graduate to the next level. And the male protagonist in this, Satan, not S-A-T-A-N, X-A-D-E-N, Satan, is the most dreamy character I've ever read, and I don't think that anything will ever be able to measure up to this for me. And I think it's probably because this was my first ever romance fantasy book that I read as an adult, and I cannot wait to read Onyx Storm when it comes out tomorrow. So exciting. But yeah, I just absolutely adored this book. I read it really quickly, even though it's quite a big one. And of course, I immediately moved on to the second book in the series, Iron Flame, which is even bigger. And a lot of people are giving this book so much hate and saying how it does not live up to the first book in any way, but I totally disagree. I thought this book was amazing. I love the relationship between Satan and the main character Violet, and yeah, it's just a super sexy, high stakes fantasy book, and it has everything a good fantasy series needs. I love this. I can't recommend it enough. If you're getting into reading fantasy, this is the perfect place to start because it's not too complex. It's definitely on the lighter side of the fantasy genre. So if you're just into sizzling sexual tension, as it says on the front of this book, and dragons, you need to read this series. And I'm sure you've already read it, but if not, now is the time. Especially because the 3rd book, Onyx Storm, is coming out tomorrow. Tea break. Okay, I'm gonna try to keep it more short from here on out. Otherwise, this video is gonna be so long. But moving straight on to the next very predictable scenario here. After Fourth Wing, where do you go? ACOTAR, of course. I moved on to read A Court of Thorns and Roses. I'd watched a few TikToks about it, but when I started, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I did not grasp what this series is and how many people are ridiculously invested in this series. I read the first book. I thought it was fine. It was definitely a more in-depth kind of fantasy world, which I really enjoyed compared to Fourth Wing, but I was kind of disappointed with the love plot here. If you've read this series, you know where this is going. But yeah, I was like, it's fine. I don't really get the hype. That is, of course, until I moved on to the second book of the series, A Court of Mist and Fury. This is definitely top 5, maybe top 3 of the books I read this year. This is such an amazing book. So romantic, so amazing. The world building, everything that happens. I'm sure most of you have read this series, but if you haven't, just do it. Just get around to it. It's amazing. For me, it lost a little bit of pace here in the 3rd book, which is very long as well. I did listen to most of this book on audiobook, which I completely regret because I think, yeah, this book should just be immersed. You have to immerse yourself fully in this book. You don't want to be listening to it and doing something else. There is a real potential that I might reread this series this year just because I want to completely throw myself into this series without missing anything. The next book in the series is a novella, so it's super short and it's called A Court of Frost and Starlight. Love this. I got back into it with this for some reason. It's not like very plot heavy. This is definitely more of like just to give some more details, some more character details, some more depth to the universe. Not a lot of plot in this book, but very enjoyable. And if not my favorite, then my second favorite book in the series is the last one, A Court of Silver Flames. This one switches characters essentially. So in A Court of Frost and Starlight, we get to follow a lot of the different characters' POVs, and then in this one we are mainly with Feyre's sister Nesta, and this just has to be experienced. Another really amazing romance plot and super hot and entertaining, but also has a lot of amazing fantasy plot. And yeah, this book has a special place in my heart, and it is also ridiculously long, but love this series. And now you may think that I would move directly on to Throne of Glass, but I did not. As a new reader, I thought there is a whole world out there that I have to experience, and I have to wait and push Throne of Glass down the line a little bit. So I did, and I moved back to another Ali Hazelwood book after reading The Love Hypothesis and then going into the fantasy genre. Realizing that Ali Hazelwood came out with a fantasy book was just the perfect mix because I was so into the fantasy genre at this point. And yeah, this did not disappoint. Bride by Ali Hazelwood is an arranged marriage between a vampire and a werewolf. And it sounds a little bit silly, and this is definitely, it is just a standalone book. It's not like a huge fantasy universe. It does not have a lot of world building, but it is definitely enjoyable and fun and sexy. And yeah, I devoured this book. I loved it so much. I really enjoyed this book. So if you want a super easy fantasy read that's just, yeah, a page turner, read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Next up, after these reads, I guess I needed a bit of a break from the fantasy and the romance, and I read Atomic Habits. So this is a big switch, a big jump. I know, I'm gonna warn you, there's a lot of jumping around here, and I'm definitely a mood reader, and I just follow whatever pulls me in the moment. So I read Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you're into any kind of self-help books, this is definitely a prime example. It was very motivating, and I think about this all the time. There are definitely principles in here that I'm using in my everyday life. It's of course all about building good habits and how to stick to them, and yeah, highly recommend if you want to improve your life in any way, essentially. Let's not talk too much about this. Next on, for the first book that I wouldn't really recommend, that I think is ridiculously overhyped, and I saw it everywhere, so I guess I thought like, oh, I guess I should read that. Tried going back to reading some contemporary romance, and I read Twisted Love by Anna Huang, and yeah, this was a huge disappointment for me. I saw it everywhere, everyone was talking about it, but this just did nothing for me. I would rate this like a 2-star, and I started it. I ended up finishing it on audiobook just to get through it, because as I say, I don't really quit books once I've started. So yeah, I don't even remember much of this book. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say. Just you don't have to. But moving on to another book that I absolutely loved. This is definitely also one of my top books of 2024, Magnolia Parks. So this is a series, and it's crazy to say that I read this in the beginning of the year and I absolutely loved it, but I have not continued the series yet. I bought the second book of the series a few months ago, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. I'm so excited to get to it. But yeah, like I said, as a new reader, I just, instead of sticking to one series, I had to try everything. But yeah, sometimes You have to just stick with what works and finish whatever series you started. I think a lot of the time it'll be a more enjoyable experience to read the series together and just binge the whole thing rather than break it up. But I still have 3 books I think left of this series. 3 or 4 books that are out there that I haven't read yet that I get to be all excited about reading. So the cover is very fun and you can't really tell what kind of book this is from the look of it, but I think it's super beautiful. But Magnolia Parks is a series about a group of super rich young kids in London, so I would compare this to Gossip Girl but in a British version. I just really love the characters in here. I just love the romance in this. I think it is so cute and also very realistic and kind of a lot more complex than you would expect from a Gossip Girl kind of arena. Something I hate about this book is when the author describes in vivid detail what they're wearing and you're just sitting there and thinking that sounds so ugly. Why would she wear that? Why, you know? And sometimes I just wish that authors wouldn't go into detail about what people were wearing, because most of the time it just throws me off completely. But setting that aside, highly recommend this book and probably the rest of the series. I can't wait to get to it. I have no excuse for why I haven't continued this series yet. Next up is another very highly rated read for me. Another 5-star read is Cleopatra and Frankenstein. This is the first, I would say, literary fiction in the stack of books. It is a romance by Coco Mellors, but it's definitely more, literary fiction for sure. It's about Cleo, a young girl who comes to New York and falls in love with Frank, who is much older than her and works at an advertising agency, and it's about their relationship. It jumps between POVs, just super complex and interesting characters, and I highly, highly, highly recommend reading this. I actually do think that this is quite a page turner, even though it is more to the serious side and doesn't it's not a plot that's riding on the romance. It's more about love than it is about romance. It's about all the ugly sides as well, and these are 2 characters that are severely struggling with their mental health, but highly recommend. Next up is a book that I don't have with me because I lent it out to my sister. Another very amazing book that I read this year is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. An absolutely amazing read. Another book that's not like a romance. So the setup is that there is a young journalist who is writing a big piece about this old Hollywood actress at her old age, and she is writing this big expose about all of her 7 husbands that she was married to throughout her life and her career as an actress in Hollywood. And it is very entertaining, very heartfelt, a very, very nice read all in all. Not really my genre, I think, so I would rate it a 3.54 stars, but I know a lot of people loved it, and it's the kind of book that I would recommend to most people. I think most people would find that book enjoyable on some level. And along that line, by the same author, Taylor Jenkins Reid, I also read Daisy Jones and the Six, which is obviously a TV series now, but it's about a fictional band called Daisy Jones and the Six, and it's set in the 70s. And again, not really my genre. Maybe I was missing some romance in this. So I don't want to blame it on the book. It's just the genre for me is not 100% working. This was fine. Didn't really leave the biggest impact on me, which is crazy because I know a lot of people really love this book. Just didn't really do it for me. Moving on. Then I got into a bit of a identity crisis, I would say, and maybe questioning what I was doing with reading all these random books, I guess. I don't know. And I decided to go to the classics. So a lot of the books that I'm reading is books that I thrifted when I've been traveling to England to see my partner James. But yeah, I got The Great Gatsby at a thrift shop for £2, it looks like, and I enjoyed this. I wish I had enjoyed it more. This actually did not really stick with me. And then I questioned, is it just that I don't like classics, or is that I just don't like this classic? So I tried again, Pride and Prejudice, which was way more up my alley, and I love this book. I love this. I thought it was so funny. So I have always been a big fan of the 2000-something-5 maybe movie Pride and Prejudice. But yeah, I love this book. I thought it was hilarious and very romantic. So Mr. Darcy for the win. Definitely just the foundation of romance as we know it today. Obviously, good job, Jane Austen. Who would have thought? Moving on to another book that people have been raving about that didn't really do it for me is Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. This is a friends to lovers, childhood friends to lovers kind of dual timeline, which I realized when reading this, I don't think I enjoy dual timelines and I don't think I enjoy friends to lovers very much, because every single time I've tried it since this, I haven't really been into it. So again, maybe it's just the trope that's not for me, and if you're into that kind of thing, this book would be the perfect example. For me, not very much. Moving on from Christina Lauren to finally getting around to the contemporary romance queen of them all, Emily Henry, and I read Book Lovers, and I actually really enjoyed this book. It wasn't like, it's not life-altering for me, and I think romance that is not fantasy, it's rare that I will enjoy contemporary romance the way I enjoy fantasy books. How can you compete with like shadow wielding, dragon riding men? I don't know. But I did enjoy this book, Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I thought it was fun. I liked the characters, I liked the setting. This is like a small town romance, but then again, I don't really remember much about it, so I guess that says something. I enjoyed this book, but it wasn't life-altering. I would rate this maybe a 3.5. I think it's a good example of a contemporary romance, but just not life-altering. So of course, I had to move on and see about another Emily Henry book, and this is You and Me on Vacation. I have the Danish versions of some of these books. I did not like this book at all. I was so disappointed with this. It's another friends to lovers, so maybe that's it. There's just, for me, the kind of, you're really close with each other, and then you're kind of afraid to take it to the next step and become a couple. It's just the most boring romance ever. I need a lot higher stakes, okay? I need you to hate each other going in. I prefer an enemies to lovers every time. This did not do it for me. I did not like this book. Again, it's like not just dual timeline, many timelines. This is about two friends who go on vacation every year together and how their relationship kind of evolves over time. Again, I don't remember a lot, and I also had to finish this on audiobook. After a few contemporary romances, it looks like I was going back to fantasy, or romantasy to be more specific. And another classic, I want to say classic within the romantasy genre, when I had read A Court of Thorns and Roses, I had read Fourth Wing. Next in line was Powerless by Lauren Roberts, another super raved about book. I enjoyed this. This is where I started realizing that a lot of fantasy books kind of have the same plot and a lot of things are reoccurring, which I didn't know because I haven't read a lot of fantasy books. But so this felt like just one trope after the other, which I honestly don't mind. I know people always say that as a bad thing. I don't mind it. I thought this was, a good example of a young adult romantasy, which is where it went wrong for me, I think. I was just the whole way through, after reading ACOTAR, after reading Fourth Wing, the lack of spice in this was just so frustrating to me. However, I did continue on to the next book in the series, which is a novella, and I read this in a day, and I actually kind of got back into it with this. I thought this is another main character, the protagonist from Powerless. Her best friend is the protagonist of this one, and I like that one a lot better. However, before moving on to the next book in the series, I read King of Wrath by Anna Huang. So again, I thought, let me give another of Anna Huang's series a try. I just could not understand that everyone were reading these books and they were all over the internet, and that I had disliked the Twisted Love so much. So I tried again with King of Wrath, and for me this was even worse. It didn't do anything for me. Sorry, Anna Huang, don't read this. Then I tried to go in a completely different direction than anything before, and I tried to read a little thriller crime situation here with The Housemaid, which is about a housemaid who works as a cleaner for a family, and then a lot of spooky things unfold in this house. This was a fun, easy read, and I enjoyed it. It wasn't very scary, it wasn't very crimey. I just thought it was more like a bit spooky, like a little bit thrilling, but nothing extraordinary. I enjoyed this. It was an enjoyable read, what can I say? Moving on to a book that has a very dear place in my heart. I read Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. This was a stunning book, and the book itself amazing, but the audiobook is narrated by Meryl Streep, the queen, the legend. Obviously this is so amazing. It's about a mom, and she is at a house with her daughters, telling them the story of when she used to have a relationship back many years ago with a famous actor, when she used to be an actress herself as well. So it kind of bears resemblance to Evelyn Hugo, but I just way preferred this. I thought it was an absolutely stunning book. The love that you can feel from this mom towards her children was actually so moving. I just cannot. Moms are just extraordinary. Highly recommend giving this book a read. Then I finally got around to reading the third and last book in the Powerless series by Lauren Roberts. I don't remember this book, but I think I really enjoyed it. Anyway, I guess at this point I thought it was time for another kind of classic, so I read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is my favorite TV series ever. Again, I found this in a thrift shop and I had to read it for £2 again. And yeah, this was amazing. Absolutely amazing. The whole way through I was just envisioning this series though, and I was constantly, anything that deviated was frustrating for me, but then at the same time it was also very predictable because yeah, I obviously watched the whole show, which goes way beyond this book. But yeah, just an absolutely amazing and super scary read. So if you haven't read the book or watched the series, now is your time. I absolutely adore the series. I think I've watched the whole thing 3 times and I love the book as well. Then I suppose I thought it was time to give Emily Henry another try, and I tried Happy Place. Again, this book did nothing for me. This is an ex-girlfriend and boyfriend who are going on a vacation with their friends, and they for some reason have to pretend that they're still a couple. And again, I think the ex-couple or the friends to lovers doesn't work for me. I need the dramatic meeting. I need the whole thing to be larger than life, and just like the falling back into it with an ex is not a trope for me. Sorry. Next, I went back to literary fiction and I read The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, which is about 2 sisters from a very small town in the US, and they're both very light-skinned Afro-Americans. One is actually passing as being white, and these 2 sisters go on to live very different lives based on the fact that one is passing as white. This is a generational book about race in America, and I adored this book. It was very good and very important, and highly recommend this one. This is again very different from many of the other books we're talking about. It's a lot more slow-paced, and you need to be a bit more patient when you read this kind of book. But when you do, you'll be really happy that you did, because this actually moves something about your perspective about the world, which is what great literature should do. So highly recommend Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. We're getting there. Next up is Crazy. I wanted to give Anna Huang another try. So I came by one of those roadside bookcases that people put out there where you can get like trade books. I didn't have a book with me, so I took this. Sorry. Twisted Games is obviously the second book in the Twisted Love series, and you can read them independently. You don't have to read all the books. It's like separate standalone stories. However, they are like friends and stuff, so you should, if you want to read all the books, you should read them in order. It's one of those series. This, surprisingly enough, I really enjoyed. This book is about a princess and her bodyguard, which is obviously really very larger than life and very dramatic, but I think I'm in love with the bodyguard trope. So definitely like this one a lot better than the other books that I read by Anna Huang. Again, not life-altering, but very spicy in a good way. So I guess that's why people read this. It's just for the spice, because the plot in these is just non-existent or hyper-existent, but very unbelievable. So do with that information what you will. I enjoyed this one, did not enjoy the other ones. Now we are around autumn fall time, and I guess I felt like I should read an autumn read. And I know I've talked about this book on the channel before, The Ex Hex by Erin Sterling. I don't know how I finished this book. I don't know why I finished this book. I absolutely hated everything about this. I was really hoping for something, for some good, fun witch love story for fall. It's, yeah, The Ex Hex as it sounds. It's about a witch that puts a hex on her ex, and many years later they get back together, and she has to help him end this curse that she put on him, and they fall back in love again. And this was terrible. Sorry, Erin Sterling. I didn't like anything about this, unfortunately. However, a book that I really enjoyed that for some reason took me forever to get into, and also it was the first time I tried tabbing when reading, The Serpent and the Wings of Night. Of course, I finally got to it. This is the perfect example of a fantasy that has it all. Yeah, I just absolutely love this book, and I bought the second one in the series not too long ago, so I'm very excited to read that, The Ashes and the Stagger's King. But I read The Serpent and the Wings of Night. The only thing is that I read this kind of simultaneously as with when I started Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, and there are so many similarities between these books that I got very confused, and I don't know why I thought I should read these at the same time. Very dumb of me, but I ended up finishing this, and from what I remember, I really enjoyed this book, and I really enjoyed this book. They are similar in many ways because it is trials and a strong female character, and she has some alliances and that kind of stuff. But The Serpent and the Wings of Night is about Oriah, who is a human adopted by a vampire king basically, and she's the only human with all these vampires, so she is very unlikely to win this huge trial that she is getting into. But she forms an alliance with a cute boy, and the romance in this was a little bit disappointing to me. However, I remember it ended on a big cliffhanger that I'm very excited to pick up on. And for me with these series, it always gets really good in the second book is what I found, so I'm excited to read the next one. I had the same experience with Throne of Glass. I enjoyed this book a lot, but for me didn't really pick up until I read Crown of Midnight, and I have realized after reading this that apparently I was supposed to read Assassin's Blade before this, which is the third book to come out, but it's a prequel, so it gives a lot of backstory, but I'm just gonna read them like she publishes them, okay? But maybe it would be nice to get some backstory to this book, because it is a little bit confusing sometimes what on earth is going on. But yeah, the main character is in this one is an assassin, so in that sense it's not similar to Serpent and the Wings of Night, because she is a very, very, very strong female lead, but she has to participate in a trial to become the king's assassin, and she meets some cute men along the way. What can I say? We love that for her. Very enjoyable. Absolutely excited to fully get into this series. Obviously, I've learned from ACOTAR by now that you shouldn't judge a book by the first book in the series. You shouldn't judge a series by the first book. So I'm 100% confident that I will love this series as much as everyone else once I fully get into it. But for now, I've read the first two books. Crown of Midnight I finished this year, so it's not a part of this video, but I know that this is going to be a big part of my life when I fully devote myself to it. But again, with it having to try everything, I wasn't fully committed enough to just say, okay, I'm gonna read only Throne of Glass books for the rest of the year. So I put it to the side and wanted to read some autumn reads. So of course I picked up The Pumpkin Spice Cafe. I was so surprised that I actually really liked this one. This is a small town romance between it's like a grumpy sunshine romance trope trope with a, what's her name, Jeannie is the main character. She inherits her aunt's cafe in a small town called Dream Harbor and starts a relationship with the grumpy farmer produce guy. It's very fitting that her name is Laura Gilmore because this is the resemblance to Gilmore Girls is absolutely insane. The book version of a Hallmark film for sure, but yeah, executed very well. I think this book just did exactly what it was supposed to do, so I actually recommend this book. So of course I immediately had to go pick up The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore, which is the second book in the series. Again, these are standalone books but within the same universe, so I would recommend reading them in order. Again, I really enjoyed this one, not as much as the first one, but I liked it. The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore is about one of the other girls in town who owns a bookstore. She's like a more quiet, nerdy girl and forms a relationship with the very outgoing, fun guy. So kind of opposite to this one, but yeah, I didn't love this as much, but it was still fun and sexy and all that good stuff. Moving on, I read a Danish book. Sorry to any of you non-Danish speaking viewers. I read Kuntenauen by Linnea Maja Ernst, which is a very amazing book about a group of friends in their 20s, early 30s, going to a summer cottage and just being different places in life at the end of your 20s. Some of them have kids, some are getting married, and some are just not there at all yet. And it's just full of really fun comments on youth and especially Danish, Copenhagen, cool leftist people. I feel like this book is making fun of someone else, like you're laughing at all these stereotypes, but then at the same time you're also kind of laughing at yourself. Just a very good read, super fun, easy to read for all of you Danish viewers out there. If you haven't read this yet, I'm sure you already have, but if you haven't, go pick it up. And then towards the end of the year, kind of went downhill, to be honest. I read A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which is a kind of teenage thriller about a high school girl solving a murder. So one of the boys from her town was accused of the murder of one of the girls from her school, and the main character is certain that he is innocent, so she makes an alliance with the boy's brother to prove his innocence. And it's a TV series, I think, as well. I would not recommend this. This was just too I was just too old for this, to be fair. This is just a teenage read. A book that's definitely for sure not a teenage read is Hooked by Emily McIntyre. I've talked about this book in a video as well. I don't even know what to say about this book. It was so filthy and I'm still scarred, to be honest. So if you're into super dark romance, maybe this is for you. The more I think about this, the more I just want to forget it, to be honest. It was super, super spicy, but in a very dark way, and I just don't think it was for me. Yeah. And lastly, of course, just before New Year's, I finished The Christmas Tree Farm by Laura Gilmore, which is the third book in the Dream Harbor series, and I enjoyed this. It wasn't life-altering. Again, another easy read. I'll probably just keep reading Laura Gilmore's books for the seasonal vibes of it. When you really want autumn vibes or you really want Christmas vibes, she's really good at that, obviously, but just general, from a fiction point of view, this is not like creme de la creme, you know? It was fine. It was fine. And that, my friends, is every single book I read in 2024, and I'm sorry that it was so much rambling, and I hope that you enjoyed. And please let me know down below if this is something you enjoy or you want to see more of, or if I should just stick to vlogging. This was my first time ever doing book reviews, and I obviously did not go into a lot of detail about these books. I did not care in any way, but I hope you enjoyed anyway, or you just had fun just hearing me yap about books. Maybe you got some inspiration to books to pick up yourself, or maybe you are just feeling more confused than ever. Who knows? But I just want to say thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.